Located just 96 kilometers from the Arctic Circle is a small town on the edge of civilization, Tanana, Alaska. This obscure town of only 200 residents survives through hunting and trapping, a way of life here. As game becomes scarce, predators sometimes risk hunting humans. Tanana is now in the midst of a harsh winter, with some locals facing severe food shortages. Stan Zure, a dog sled driver, escaped Boston 40 years ago to settle in Tanana. Now 63, he and his family are running out of meat. With careful rationing, they can last a week, but without meat, they face starvation. It is the North American caribou hunting season, and Stan, alongside his 21-year-old son Joey, is embarking on the most critical hunt of the year. Currently, the temperature is nearly minus 40 degrees Celsius, the coldest winter since Stan's arrival in Alaska. They have spent 3 days on the mountain searching for caribou, but the cold forces the animals to migrate further. Despite searching all known caribou spots from previous years, they find no trace. The duo turns their gaze to the formidable glowing mountains, believing the caribou may be on the other side. However, the mountains are steep and treacherous, and a storm is brewing. Facing whiteout conditions could be deadly, but the risk is deemed necessary compared to the threat of starvation. They must hurry before the wind erases any tracks. The journey's greatest obstacle is not the mountain, but the river before them, which is partially frozen. The central current is too strong to freeze, and falling in could mean certain death. In such situations, Stan leads, preferring to risk himself over his son. He prods the ice with a stick he cut by the river. Ice needs to be over 10 centimeters thick to support a man, and fortunately, parts of the Tochi River meet this criterion. Father and son cross the river successfully but find no caribou on the other side. Stan swore not to return home without game, but a storm has set in, dropping temperatures to minus 42 degrees Celsius and reducing visibility. They are forced to abandon the hunt and return home, yet the pursuit of survival means their hunting will not cease. Will they succeed next time? In addition to Stan Zure, Charlie's family also faces food shortages. Tanana, a product of last century's gold rush, nearly became a ghost town as the rush faded. Yet, some, like Charlie, a native, stayed. He learned what electricity was at 16 and lives off hunting and trapping, essential for survival in Alaska. The town is small, with close-knit relations, and when problems arise, they turn to Charlie for help. Mutual aid is key to survival here. Charlie is always busy, either helping others or on his way to help. He manages the town's water supply, with 2/3 of the population depending on him. In temperatures that can drop to minus 56 degrees Celsius, he constantly heats the pipes to prevent freezing, which would otherwise ruin the entire system. The demand for heating wood is high, and the local dry trees are nearly depleted. Cutting live trees proves too difficult, which greatly troubles Charlie. Additionally, a lone wolf has been spotted on the town's edge, desperate enough to approach the settlement, posing a real threat. Charlie, determined to prevent any attacks, takes his 20-year-old son Bob to track it. Observations suggest the tracks are from the same wolf. Over the past decade, there have been 20 wolf attacks, making it crucial to eliminate this threat. Imagine if a child encountered this hungry wolf after school. Speaking of children, Courtney, who has a young child, manages 40 sled dogs alone while her husband is away, feeding them fish all winter. However, a lone wolf has been stealing the fish. Unable to handle it alone, she turns to Charlie for help. To catch the wolf, Charlie sets a powerful trap outside the fish shed, covered with unscented paper towels and snow, and uses beaver scent as bait on a post to lure the wolf. Hunting for meat and selling fur are vital for the villagers, especially during the North American caribou hunting season. Both Stan Zure and Charlie's families are worried about their dwindling food supplies. After days without sighting any caribou, they finally receive reliable information about a successful hunt 140 kilometers away. They quickly prepare to join in, hoping to secure some meat. This journey will take several days, and knowing the challenges of obtaining water in the wilderness, Stan prepares ample water for his wife. Even for someone experienced like Stan, extracting water through 1.8 meters of ice can take an entire afternoon. Recently overwhelmed with the water plant needing wood, the presence of wolves, and a lack of food, Charlie decides to focus on securing food first. The two families team up for a better chance of success in hunting the caribou. After sorting their affairs, the two fathers and their sons, fully equipped, set off for the hunting grounds. Hunting in such conditions carries many risks, including the possibility of not returning, but the alternative is not surviving here. To save time, Stan also uses a snowmobile. As the hunting season nears its end, returning empty-handed again means facing starvation. Hours later, they near their destination and begin searching for caribou within a 20-kilometer radius. As they narrow down the area, they finally find extensive caribou tracks. The noise from the snowmobiles could scare the animals, so they proceed on foot. Surprised by the sheer number of tracks, even Stan and Charlie admit to never seeing so many before. They are thrilled, sensing a large herd nearby. However, their happiness was short-lived as the tracks split in two different directions. They had to split up, increasing the risk that one group might not find any game. Charlie came up with a plan. He and his son Bob would ride their motorcycle to get ahead of the caribou, while Stan Zure and his son Joey would follow from behind. After a tough chase, Stan and Joey caught up with the caribou first, about 140 yards away. To increase their chances, they wanted to close in to about 100 yards, but to avoid detection, Stan decided not to move closer. They positioned themselves for a coordinated shot, aiming to bring down two caribou simultaneously. After 2 shots, they successfully hunted 2 North American caribou. On Charlie's end, after a motorcycle chase and on foot, they too found the caribou herd. Charlie let Bob take the first shot, his first solo hunting attempt, which made him very nervous. To survive in Alaska, he had to manage on his own. He fired when a buck stopped, but the caribou didn't die on the spot. Panicking that it might escape, he hastily fired again. Charlie, an experienced hunter, took a smooth, successful shot with 1 try. The hunt was successful, but their work wasn't done yet. They quickly removed the caribou's innards to prevent the meat from spoiling and filled the stomach with snow for preservation. Although they don't eat the innards, they do consume and greatly enjoy the heart. Other organs were not wasted either. They would be used as bait for traps. With enough meat to last several weeks, surviving here felt like a constant battle, with each changing season bringing new challenges, threats, and dangers. In Tanana, Alaska, hunter Stan Zure set 250 traps along his hunting trail at the start of the season. A week passed without catching anything, mainly because the extreme cold kept all animals hidden. However, temperatures rose significantly overnight, presenting a new trapping opportunity. Today, Stan planned to check and set traps with his son, Joey. With only 3 weeks left in the trapping season, time was short. Last week, Stan and Charlie had managed to hunt North American caribou, solving their immediate food concerns. But in Alaska, fur is the only resource that can be converted into dollars, used to buy clothes, supplies, bullets, and guns. However, the situation was bleak. Joey planned to use caribou innards to set his own traps, aiming to catch a $400 wolf to prove himself. Trapping wolves with snares is notoriously difficult, even for experienced hunters, often ending in failure. His ultimate goal was to hunt independently, no longer relying on his father. This wolf could symbolize his rite of passage. After confirming their positions on the map, the father and son set off. Their trapping line was a 60-kilometer loop to the northeast of the village. They traveled north for over 20 kilometers and stopped near Thunderbird Creek in a wooded area. Here, Stan observed Joey as he set up his self-taught wolf trap. To be a successful hunter, one must know where to place traps by predicting animal paths. In the woods, they used caribou innards as bait and set simple noose traps. If a wolf came for the bait, it could get its head caught in the noose, leading to suffocation. Wolves have a keen sense of smell and can detect scents from kilometers away, attracting them to the bait. Joey's newly learned technique, passed down by local indigenous people, proved that sometimes the oldest methods are the most effective. He broke many branches to cover surrounding paths, forcing wolves towards the traps. Joey is very independent, which sometimes leads him to reject his father's advice. After setting up the wolf traps, father and son continued to check the traps they had set earlier. Returning empty-handed today would be particularly disappointing, as the first few traps had consistently caught game in recent years. Stan Zure hoped their luck would continue this year, as he relied on trapping to make at least $4,000 annually. Otherwise, he would lose money. In Alaska, trapped animals are usually found frozen, but today, they caught a live wolverine, which is problematic for fur trappers for two reasons. Firstly, shooting it could damage the valuable $400 fur, and secondly, wolverines are notoriously aggressive and dangerous. Stan, an experienced hunter, cut down a small tree to use as a makeshift weapon to deal with the wolverine up close. After a few rounds, the wolverine was stunned, giving Stan the chance to shoot it in the head with a pistol, aiming at a spot to preserve the fur. The shot was successful, and Stan felt the fur, pleased with its quality. With the hunting season shortened by extreme cold, they needed to use their time wisely to maximize their gains. Today, Joey and his relative Sud went to check the traps together. It's safer to have company while hunting, especially when pursuing difficult game like wolves. Even seasoned hunters like Charlie often fail to catch wolves. But Joey, driven by the challenge, was determined to face the difficulties head-on, a fitting attitude for the young. On their way, they found wolf tracks leading directly towards Joey's traps, indicating the bait was effective. Joey felt a surge of excitement, thinking they might have succeeded. However, the reality was harsh. The wolf had visited and taken some bait, but evaded the trap, marking a temporary setback in his first wolf hunt. Despite this, Joey was not ready to give up and was determined to keep trying. Meanwhile, his father, Stan Zure, was out checking the 250 traps he had set, a demanding job in harsh weather. Stan had been living and hunting in the wilderness for 40 years, his passion evident as he mainly trapped martens, each worth about $100, needing to make $4,000 each season to survive. Lately, his luck had been poor, often returning empty-handed. But it wasn't his worst year. When he first arrived, his family survived a year on just $55, resorting to eating their sled dogs. A grim memory. Today was yet another fruitless day. On his way back, he passed Thunderbird Creek and decided to check Joey's wolf traps. No matter how old his son got, a father's worry never eased. The trap hadn't caught any wolves, likely because the snare was set too high. Stan adjusted it casually before heading home. The next day, Joey, joined by Charlie's son Bob, went back to check the wolf traps. On the way, Bob's motorcycle engine blew out due to aggressive driving, nearly causing an accident and scaring him badly. Fixing the engine would cost $600, and he anticipated a severe scolding at home. Unable to continue their task, they had to drag the motorcycle back. As expected, Charlie was furious, especially since money was tight, and now he faced a $600 expense, a situation that would upset anyone. Charlie punished Bob by sending him to chop wood in the forest. The money from selling the wood would offset the loss from the damaged motorcycle engine. The next day, Joey returned to check the wolf traps again, only to find not only were there no wolves caught, but the traps had been tampered with. He suspected his father's involvement, which made him feel grateful yet also angry. Joey reset the traps to their original setup and stormed home to talk with his father. Despite the tension, they eventually opened up to each other. Stan was trying to correct a mistake, and Joey was experimenting with new methods to help earn more money. After clearing the air, the issue was resolved. Currently, Joey's journey in wolf trapping is still fraught with challenges, and Charlie's efforts aren't faring much better. Despite the long struggle, the lone wolf was still at large until today, when townspeople informed Charlie that the dangerous wolf was spotted by the river, his best chance to catch it. Since traps were ineffective, Charlie decided to shoot it. He quickly went to the river, found the wolf by following its tracks, and shot it, ending the hunt with a single precise shot. Local hunters respect wolves as formidable hunters themselves, but also as threats due to their aggressive behavior. After a 2-week battle of wits, Charlie finally triumphed, ensuring the safety of the town's children, including Courtney's. Charlie's feat of killing the lone wolf quickly became the talk of the town, drawing crowds. A wolf pelt could sell for $400 to $500, nearly covering the cost of the motorcycle engine repair. After skinning the wolf, Charlie returned the carcass to where it was killed, honoring the old belief that this allows the wolf's spirit to enter the cycle of rebirth. With only 2 weeks left in the hunting season, the upcoming days will be even tougher. Charlie and his son spent 3 weeks trapping and caught only 7 beavers, which would sell for about $700. However, they still needed to make another $1,300 to break even for the trapping season. This is shaping up to be their worst season in 15 years. Tanana has no roads, and frozen rivers serve as highways to traps in winter. This year, Alaska is exceptionally cold, but an early thaw could cut the hunting season short if the rivers start to melt. Today might be Charlie's last hunt of the season, requiring extra caution to avoid potentially lethal mistakes. He took his son Bob back to Fish Lake to check the traps. The movable branches used as bait suggested that beavers might have been caught. Eager to see the results, Charlie had Bob dig through the ice. Having been hunting since he was 8, Charlie wanted to pass on his extensive experience to his son. The relationship between fathers and sons is often a mix of strictness and profound love. Initially, sons might not understand, or might even rebel, but they come to appreciate their father's intentions once they become parents themselves. Unfortunately, the trap Bob set only had its bait eaten without capturing any beavers. Charlie pointed out that the mistake was due to the snare being set too wide, and Bob needed to learn from this error. Setting traps seems simple, but involves many nuances that are hard to master. To make up for his mistake, Bob worked even harder in their next activities. At the second trap site, they began to retrieve the snares from the water, a task that needed to be done slowly to prevent the prey from escaping. The last snare got stuck, and Bob had to reach into the freezing lake water, causing intense pain in his hands. In addition, contact with water contaminated by beaver feces could expose Bob to giardiasis, a parasitic disease causing fever and diarrhea that can be life-threatening if not treated promptly. However, when Bob pulled a beaver's tail from the water, he was no longer concerned about giardiasis. The size of the tail indicated the beaver's large size. Despite the cold, Bob firmly held onto the tail to prevent it from falling back into the water, not wanting to disappoint his father again. Finally, they secured the animal. The size was impressive. They used snow to dry the beaver's fur to prevent it from freezing, as thawing it would take 2 days. After catching the beaver, they hurried home because Bob needed to wash his hands thoroughly to prevent the Giardia parasite from infecting him. Meanwhile, in Tanana, Alaska, hunter Stan Zure was worried about the dismal trapping season. The season was ending, but he had only earned $1,300, far from his $4,000 target. Despite living in the wilderness, some necessities like bullets, gasoline, and tools can only be bought with money. To make up the $4,000, they had to stay out longer. Stan, along with his son Joey and nephew Sud, moved into a cabin at the center of their hunting route, which Stan built 40 years ago, and where he had lived for 11 years. They tidied up the cabin before setting out to check the traps. Joey was eager to check his wolf traps, seeing it as his best chance to make a name for himself. Scratches on the cabin's doorpost caught their attention, likely caused by a black bear, a level of damage even Stan had never seen before. It was probably the smell of dried fish, prepared for their sled dogs, that had attracted the bear. When bears wake from hibernation, they become the most dangerous creatures in the area, more fearsome than wolves. Alaska is home to over 100,000 bears, and bear attacks are not uncommon. Stan had been injured by a bear in his youth, and only survived because the bear wasn't hungry. Bears are valuable for their pelts, which can sell for thousands of dollars, not to mention their skulls, paws, and meat. Hunting a bear could significantly boost Joey's reputation. He didn't want to spend his life catching only small, less valuable animals like his father. Joey and Sud decided to hunt a black bear, located about 3 kilometers north where many bear dens were found. They planned to provoke the bear with a 3-meter stick and then kill it without damaging the valuable fur and skull. They quickly found a bear den. Joey poked inside with a stick while Sud aimed his rifle at the entrance, ready to react if the bear charged out. They were scared, but the potential profit and their need to survive overcame their fear. Bear dens are usually over 2 meters deep with a narrow, winding entrance, making it difficult to reach the bear with just a stick. When they couldn't lure the bear out, Joey made a bold move to enter the den with a flashlight and a gun to check for turns and if a bear was actually inside. This risky action could have cost him his life at any moment. Sud positioned himself to pull Joey out if needed. Unfortunately, after exploring, they found the den empty. They returned to the wolf traps, which were also empty, leaving them disheartened. Joey loved the thrill of hunting large animals like bears and wolves, but reality was often harsh. The difficulty of capturing large prey was beyond his expectations. Becoming a skilled hunter seemed a long way off for him. Joey and Sud lost a lot of valuable time due to their unsuccessful bear hunt. Unable to secure large game, they settled for smaller prey and joined Stan's array to trap martens. Martens, weasel-like creatures about the size of a house cat, are prized for their smooth fur and fetch about $100 each. For centuries, they have been a target for fur trappers due to their abundance and steady demand. Although Joey disdained these less valuable animals, his family had always relied on trapping martens for livelihood. Today, Stan Zure was lucky, quickly catching the first marten, covering half of the hunting expenses. Living off the wilderness is tough. Stan's best year involved catching 65 martens, his record. The harsh environment often means that effort and reward are not proportional, but their deep passion for this lifestyle is what has kept them going for so many years. While they talked, Stan caught a second marten, adding another $100 to their earnings. Their luck continued as they found a third in one of Joey's earlier set traps. At this point, Joey didn't care about the size of the game. Any income was welcome. Over 24 hours, they caught 18 martens, increasing their earnings by $1,800. However, with temperatures rising above freezing, their time was limited. Once the snow and ice melted significantly, the hunting season would end prematurely. Just as they were fretting about this, the next trap surprised them with a live animal, a large lynx, potentially worth over $400. Lynxes are formidable fighters, capable of taking down an adult North American caribou. If it escaped the trap, it might immediately attack. The hunters needed to subdue the lynx without damaging its fur. Given Joey's recent hunting failures and shaken confidence, Stan gave him the responsibility to handle the lynx. They fixed a noose on the end of a stick, and Joey used it to loop the lynx's neck. Although they didn't catch a bear or a wolf, capturing the lynx was a satisfying consolation for Joey. This was the last trap they checked that day, and they needed to return to camp before dark. With so much game, they had no time to rest and needed to quickly skin the animals, a critical skill for hunters, as poorly skinned fur loses value. Lynx fur is thin and tests a hunter's skinning skills and knife control. Of course, this was no challenge for Stan, who had been hunting for 40 years. This effectively marked the end of the trapping season. The Zure father and son had caught 30 martens, a wolverine, and a lynx, roughly breaking even financially. If they utilized the full potential of their catch, they might even make a profit. Their dinner that night was lynx meat, typically eating whatever they caught during the hunt. Stan had lived this way in Alaska for 40 years. With temperatures in Alaska continuing to rise above freezing, all snow and ice were beginning to melt. Brown, grizzly, and black bears were awakening, making hunting even riskier. Charlie and Bob now had to be armed to protect themselves from bear attacks. To reach their beaver trapping area, they had to cross a marshland. The persistent warmth had prematurely melted a stream they needed to cross, a situation locals approached with extreme caution due to its potentially deadly risks. Charlie had once nearly lost his life in such conditions. Despite knowing the dangers ahead, they pressed on for the sake of their livelihood. Returning to Fish Lake, the high temperatures had affected trap settings. With the current warmth, the trap's openings couldn't be frozen, greatly increasing the chance of beavers escaping. Charlie had little hope, but after checking, they found a beaver had been caught. He called Bob over to carefully lift the beaver to avoid losing it at the last moment, which would certainly result in a scolding from Charlie. Successfully pulling the beaver ashore, Charlie and his son earned another $100. The ice and snow continued to melt, so they hurried to check the other traps. Racing along, they reached the second trap site. Before even getting close, Charlie spotted a live beaver struggling on the ice. Such sightings are rare and usually only occur during warm weather. To ensure the fur remained intact, they couldn't shoot it. Instead, Charlie quietly approached and knocked the beaver out with a club. This added another $100 to their earnings. Throughout this year's trapping season, Bob learned many new skills and showed his thoughtful side. There are many items needed for hunting, and Charlie inevitably forgot one or two. Fortunately, Bob remembered to bring everything his father forgot, proving the saying, like father, like son. This season, they caught a total of 16 beavers, selling them for $1,600. This amount only covered the season's fuel expenses, making it a very dismal hunting season. However, if they could learn fur processing from old Tom, they could potentially triple their earnings. Before selling, their first task was to skin the beavers. They also consumed the beaver meat, as food is precious in such locations. After a busy hunting season, not only did they fail to make money, but they might also have dipped into their savings. In Tanana, along the Yukon River, the area has fully warmed up with temperatures rising to around 5 degrees Celsius. The wilderness dwellers depend on different animals each season for their sustenance. With spring's arrival, the 5-day goose hunting season began. Geese are an important food source for the people of Tanana, and they rely on these 5 days to secure food for the coming weeks. You might wonder, can't they just buy food? In Tanana, there is nowhere to buy it. Unlike cities where you can work a 9-to-5 job and buy groceries, that system doesn't apply here. The only job here is survival. If they want food, they must hunt legally huntable animals. Every goose hunting season, all the hunters in town spring into action, concentrating on the hunting area. Most residents are Athabascan, part of a Native American group. For centuries, they have relied on birds as a source of meat in the spring. Without sufficient geese, they could starve. Hunting birds remains a crucial way for locals to obtain food and has become a tradition in the town. Catching the first goose of the year is a matter of pride for the natives. Joey, true to his character, is determined to get the first goose. Last season, he shot the first goose, making quite a splash. He is eager to be at Fish Lake to shoot this year's first goose. However, his approach is completely different from Stan Zure's. Stan plans to drive a dog sled to the lake steadily, using the dogs to retrieve geese that fall into the water. Whether or not he gets the first goose doesn't matter to him, but this led to a serious mistake. Driving a dog sled through slush might not work. A snowmobile can travel over 90 kilometers per hour, while a dog sled only manages about 5 kilometers per hour. Moreover, the dogs might refuse to work once they reach watery areas. Eventually, they had to leave the dog sled behind and ride a motorcycle together to Fish Lake. The journey was perilous, requiring their experience and courage to reach the hunting area. Apart from these motorcyclists, in the southern part of the Tanana River, the more solitary James and his son were heading to the hunting area by boat. This method has some limitations, but is safer. He is cautious because his uncle disappeared while hunting geese. Traveling by water wasn't entirely safe either. Along the way, the father-son duo encountered large amounts of floating ice and nearly had an accident. Although they arrived safely in the end, they hoped to never encounter such conditions again. Stan Zure and his son were among the first to reach the hunting area. They used surrounding vegetation to build a blind to hide from the geese. Lacking realistic goose decoys, they made a few from mud and added white cloth for wings. Although makeshift, these actually worked somewhat. To attract the geese, they also used a whistle that could mimic bird calls. Everything was set, and they just waited for the geese to arrive. Charlie and his son also made it to Fish Lake, but like everyone else, they faced a common problem. All hunters were in place, but the geese were nowhere to be seen. It was quite a long wait, causing impatience among the hunters. Finally, around noon, a flock of geese appeared. Joey quickly fired, but the sharpshooter of Tanana missed. Surprisingly, Stan Zure, who was less skilled with a gun, fired a successful shot and got the first kill. Although Joey was somewhat disappointed, he was relieved that someone else hadn't killed a goose first. Shooting a flying target is very challenging. Over at Charlie's site, they had a wager. Whoever shot the first goose would make the other pluck and prepare it. Charlie, with his superior shooting skills and experience, unsurprisingly won over his novice son, Bob. How tough life in the wilderness could be depended entirely on their hunting success. Back in Tanana, on the Yukon River, the entire town's hunters participated in the 5-day goose hunting season. Stan Zure getting the first goose was a proud moment for the town. However, they didn't encounter a second goose until sunset. After the hunting season, Stan and Joey had to collect all 250 traps they had set, as required by regulations, so they planned to head home together. Stan would collect traps the next day, while Joey would continue goose hunting. The fat Canadian black geese were crucial for their food supply in the coming weeks. This year, the thaw came too early, complicating what should have been simple. On the second day of the hunting season, James, who preferred to hunt alone, took his 14-year-old son Cecil hunting, following Athabascan tradition. In this community, failing to hunt in specific ways could mean losing their indigenous status. Every father aims to pass all his skills to his child, and James was no exception. They hid in a blind and attracted 2 geese with a call, but unfortunately, Cecil missed. Hunting flying targets tests precision shooting and anticipation, which was very challenging for a 14-year-old. However, when another flock of geese was attracted by the whistle, Cecil took aim and successfully shot his first goose. This success boosted Cecil's confidence. One day, he might teach his 4 younger brothers how to hunt. Today, Joey also returned to Fish Lake. Reflecting on the spring, it had been grim, with melting ice posing dangers and few geese flying in. In half a day, Joey only managed to shoot 3 geese. Watching the cracking ice and rising water levels, he decided to head home. Risking his life for a few geese wasn't worth it. Meanwhile, after a long wait, Charlie and his son finally encountered a flock of geese. They shot quite a few. Charlie's excellent marksmanship impressed Bob, who hoped to one day match his father's skills. But proficiency with a gun comes from years of experience and cannot be achieved overnight. As they were celebrating their success, a loud cracking noise came from the lake. Alarmed, they realized large sections of the ice were breaking. They quickly ran to their temporary camp, packed all their equipment into their vehicle, and hurried home. It was a race against time and for their lives, where only winning was an option. The temperature had risen to 12 degrees Celsius, and many areas had deep standing water. Invisible ice holes were a danger. Falling into one meant there was no coming back. These wet conditions were also a challenge for snowmobiles. Bob's vehicle broke down due to water ingress in the transmission belt. Without spare parts, they had to tow the vehicle back. At this time, all the hunters were returning home. In the marshy areas, they came together, each sharing similar tales of exhaustion. Many younger hunters were experiencing this type of severe condition for the first time, leading to confusion and fear. During this brief gathering, Charlie ran into his Uncle George. They had previously survived similar conditions, which had been a near-death experience. Now, the safest approach was for everyone to move together. If someone had an accident, there were more people to help. After a brief rest, the group resumed their journey. The rising temperatures had created more ice holes in the mandatory swamp areas, a terrifying experience known only to those who had traversed it. It felt as though death was watching their every move. After a grueling 5-hour trek, the hunting party finally exited the swamp and crossed the Tanana River to return to town. Overall, the hunters were lucky. They all made it home before dark. However, not everyone was fortunate. The next day, they learned that one member of the hunting party, Charlie's Uncle George, had not returned home. This plunged the town into chaos as everyone tried to locate him. Despite searching the area around the town, they found no trace of him. Most missing persons cases here are viewed optimistically, as the wilderness is like a second home to them. If not severely injured, surviving a night outdoors is usually manageable. However, during the spring thaw, falling into an ice hole could likely lead to drowning. As the volunteer fire chief, Stan Zure naturally took charge of the situation. The town quickly organized a search party along the route the hunters had used the previous day. Given the already poor conditions, returning the same way would be extremely challenging, making the search very risky. But they had to try to find George. 8 snowmobiles headed to the last place he was seen for a search. Charlie brought in a bush plane to search from the air. Time was critical. If George had fallen into the river, hypothermia could set in quickly. The plane couldn't check the dense forests, so ground searches were left to the snowmobile rescue team. They found a few of George's spent cartridges, but no sign of him. 2 hours into the search, river conditions worsened again, making it impossible for snowmobiles to continue. The bush plane became the last hope, but unfortunately, Charlie's aerial search also turned up no clues. However, they continued to believe that an experienced hunter like George could survive in the forest. The search for George didn't stop there. Fairbanks sent a helicopter that could fly lower, which was more advantageous for the search effort. Bob served as an observer on the helicopter because he knew the last place George was seen. The highest point in town, Miss Inch Hill, overlooked the entire Yukon and Tanana rivers. Someone using binoculars there spotted a snowmobile on the ice, but by the time the police directed the helicopter there, only heavy tire tracks remained. The helicopter circled the area for 2 hours without finding anything. It was now presumed that George had likely fallen into an ice hole. When professional rescue teams arrived, along with 8 townspeople, they returned to the scene. However, the nature of their mission had changed. They were no longer searching for a survivor, but likely for a body. After 12 hours of searching, bad news arrived. George had tragically died. He accidentally fell into an ice hole while on his snowmobile, hitting his head on the ice and never getting up again. This is the harsh reality of wilderness life, where human life is incredibly fragile against the forces of nature. Losing a loved one is one of the hardest things in the world. However, during these times, it's important to remain strong and prepare for the funeral. Most people in the town belonged to a large family, and everyone was expected to attend George's funeral. The town's traditions are a mix of Native American and Western customs, forming a new funeral practice. One tradition that has remained unchanged is the potlatch. Here, the potlatch is not a display of wealth but a Thanksgiving meal prepared for those attending the funeral. The main dish is moose meat, with one moose weighing several hundred kilograms, enough to feed over 200 people in town. Charlie assigned the experienced hunter Stan Zure to hunt the moose. Although it was not hunting season, local regulations allow hunting moose for potlatch. Stan Zure received information about a moose and entered the forest. Normally, hunting a moose could take 3 days or even a week, but this time, he had less than 24 hours to catch it before George's funeral. To locate the moose accurately, 63-year-old Stan Zure climbed a tall birch tree. The moose was not far ahead. Stan quickly pursued it, and once within range, he didn't hesitate to fire. His shot hit the moose's lungs, killing it instantly. The most challenging part of the potlatch preparations was thus resolved. Meanwhile, since the town lacked funeral supplies, the carpenter Courtney was making a coffin for George. After George's body was autopsied in Fairbanks, it was placed directly into the coffin at the airport and transported by car to the church for the ceremony. The community believes in burial, even if it means digging through permafrost as hard as stone. Courtney used her spare time to craft a pair of native-style shoes for George. During the funeral, the church was filled with crying as the grief of losing a loved one was fully expressed. After the ceremony, the attendees carried the coffin to the cemetery and buried George. Those who attended the funeral shared in a potlatch following native traditions. People ate moose meat and remembered the deceased through singing and dancing, a typical way to celebrate life in remote Alaskan towns. George's passing served as a stark reminder to the younger generation not to underestimate the dangers of glaciers and to always maintain a deep respect for nature. A cabin worth $1,000 was bought by 21-year-old Joey, who found a bargain. To truly own it, he needed to move it to his own homestead 6 kilometers away. If not moved within 2 days, the current owner was required to demolish it. These cabins, dating back to the 1920s from a decommissioned military base, were a source of affordable housing in Tanana. Joey, often clashing with his father over trivial matters, saw this as an opportunity to live separately. Stan Zure had bought his house here and moved it with a truck. Joey's house, not entirely made of wood, posed additional challenges for moving. With limited machinery in Tanana, they had to use primitive methods. They first supported the cabin with 2 large trees before laying logs underneath and pulling it with a bulldozer. In the deep forest, they found ideal large trees, trimmed them, and hauled them to the building site with a pickup. Any additions to the house had to be removed because they were not integral to the structure and could not be transported together. Parts that could be moved separately were, and those that couldn't be were dismantled and reassembled later. As they worked, the father-son conflicts continued, reinforcing Joey's determination to move. He was resolute that the cabin had to reach his homestead. Failure was not an option. To reduce conflicts, Stan Zure took on tasks that required him to be away from the site. The next day, the bulldozer was in place, and the most strenuous work began. First, they lifted the entire cabin using 4 jacks. Then, they slid the pre-prepared logs underneath it. Whether these 2 logs could support the 15-ton house was uncertain. As they slowly lowered the jacks, the logs bent slightly but held the weight. The first step was a success. Now onto the second phase, pulling the cabin away from the homestead with the bulldozer. This step was critical. Improper handling could cause the house to fall apart. Fortunately, they successfully detached the house from its foundation, a hard-earned success thanks to everyone's efforts. Now they had to tow it 6 kilometers to Joey's own homestead. They hadn't gone 100 meters before encountering a new problem. an electrical cable blocking the path, with three 7,000-volt high-voltage lines above it. Any wrong move could be dangerous. Joey volunteered to clear the line, but Stan Zure worried whether he could handle such a risky task. In his father's eyes, Joey would always be a child, but Joey had grown up and was capable of managing such issues on his own. Thanks to Joey's efforts, the cabin successfully passed the electrical obstacle. The remaining 6 kilometers would take at least 8 hours at their current pace, but it actually took 9 hours to safely transport the cabin to Joey's homestead. The cost of moving the cabin likely exceeded $1,000, but Joey finally had his own place, and his father was genuinely happy for him. With some repairs, the cabin could be a home for decades. As Tanana's weather grew warmer, the meat stored for winter began to spoil and rot. Bears could smell this from 5 kilometers away, so it was essential to dispose of the garbage. For safety, the dump was located 3 miles from town. While throwing away the foul-smelling trash, Bob suddenly saw a bear lying above the dump. He realized he had rushed out so quickly that he had forgotten his gun, leaving him terrified and rushing back to his car. Over the past decade, there had been nearly 20 fatal bear attacks in Alaska. Normally, Charlie handled dangerous wildlife invasions, like the lone wolf he had taken down before. This black bear was at least 10 times bigger than a wolf and far more dangerous, especially for children. Because Bob had not carried a gun, Charlie criticized him. There was no time to waste. They quickly armed themselves and drove back to the dump. The footprints left at the scene suggested the bear was of medium size. After feasting at the dump, the black bear had already fled. It was crucial to clear any bears that ventured into town to prevent more from coming. Charlie's next task was to warn families with children about the black bear. In Alaska, bears are among the deadliest predators. Charlie made sure to alert James, who had many children, and was understandably worried about the safety of his kids. Over the next few days, Charlie was preoccupied with the threat of the bear. Without removing it, he found it hard to rest. Today, he and his son returned to the dump to conduct a thorough search around the area. Entering the forest, the bear's territory, they knew any mistake could lead to an attack without a chance to fire their guns. They followed the footprints deep into the forest, where garbage and deer bones stripped by the bear littered the area. The tracking was tense. Even with shotguns, a direct encounter would not favor them. However, the bear did not appear, and their search was in vain. During this period, James and his 2 sons also encountered the bear while walking their dog. He immediately grabbed his gun and gave chase, but once they entered the forest, the bear disappeared. It was their first time dealing with such a cunning black bear. Stealthy, quick, and ghost-like, likely having moved on to forage elsewhere. For now, they could leave it be. Charlie had more pressing matters to attend to, preparing for the harsh winter ahead. This week, everyone in the town heads to the river to collect wood, storing it for winter heating. During the thaw each year, dead wood from upstream washes into the river, providing Tanana residents with an accessible source of heating material. Experts like James, who is skilled in collecting wood, can gather enough in 1 week not only to keep warm all winter but also to make a good profit. Charlie also collects wood but has more mouths to feed. Hunter Stan Zure hasn't joined the wood-gathering group yet. His 15-year-old aluminum boat is badly damaged and the engine has broken down. He needs to travel 240 kilometers to Fairbanks to repair the engine and replace the boat's body. During busy times at home, his daughter Caitlin, who studies in the city, returns to help out. The boat repair could take several days, and Caitlin needs to manage the household affairs in his absence. There are thousands of dried fish in the fish shed, intended as food for the snowmobile dogs. However, while checking them, Stan Zure discovered signs of theft and found bear droppings with a fishy smell. It seems the bear that escaped from the dump has visited his place. With Stan planning to be away for several days for the boat repair, leaving only his wife and daughter at home, the thought of the bear returning is frightening. This bear must be dealt with, as bears have a higher propensity to attack humans than other animals and are more dangerous than wolves. Temporarily putting aside boat repairs and wood collection, Stan Zure focuses entirely on eliminating this threat. Bears usually avoid contact with humans unless driven by a lack of food. According to Stan Zure, in one particularly scarce year, bears attacked many people in the town. and the residents had no choice but to kill the bears and eat their meat. After a long chase, finding only fresh bear tracks, Stan realized the bear had vanished again. Despite hours of tracking, he returned home without success. He and his daughter must now stay alert, ready for a possible direct encounter with the bear. Suddenly, the dogs began barking furiously, a sure sign that someone or something had entered the property. Stan hurriedly grabbed his gun, knowing it must be the black bear returning. He knew not to shoot unless he could make a lethal shot, as wounding the bear could provoke a dangerous attack. Keeping a safe distance, he aimed for the bear's heart and lungs and waited for the right moment to fire. The bear fell at the sound of the gun. Approaching a wounded bear can be deadly, as they can attack in an instant. Only when the bear was confirmed dead did Stan, breathless with tension, finally relax. The bear's pelt, claws, and skull were worth approximately $2,000, not to mention the substantial amount of meat. Now Stan could proceed with buying a new boat with peace of mind. The automatic fish trap, a device placed in the river, allows locals to catch a large quantity of fish while enjoying their activities. Originating from the east coast of the USA during the 1800s gold rush, it was introduced to Alaska's natives and remains their primary fishing tool. The device works by river water turning a fan with fish racks, scooping up fish passing underneath. The fish slide down a sloped chute into a storage box. With the wood collection season over, Tanana's fishing season is about to start. Fish are a main source of food during winter, along with hunted meat, as fruits and vegetables are hard to come by. The annual fish migration, known as the fish run, requires the fish traps to be prepared in advance to not miss the peak period. Missing the fish run means less fish and potential hunger in winter. The fishing season lasts 4 weeks, during which fishing is legally permitted. Stan Zuray sets his fish traps over 70 kilometers north of Tanana. His family, consisting of 4 people and 14 dogs, relies on these fish for sustenance. The new boat glided over the water, creating ripples that spread out in every direction. This beautiful scene was like living inside a painting, a stark contrast to the harsh realities of life. In less than an hour, Stan Zuray arrived at the fishing camp where a young man named Izzy was already waiting. Whenever Joey was busy, Izzy would come to help Stan. The two divided the tasks. Stan Zuray operated the winch while Izzy placed rollers under the fish trap. Weighing 4 tons, the fish trap was supported by a winch assembled from various parts, barely functional and somewhat unsafe. Stan Zuray had almost lost 3 fingers to such old equipment, managing to save only 2. The launch of the water wheel was not smooth. A steel cable snapped, almost injuring Izzy, but they managed to avoid any serious harm. Stan Zuray positioned the boat behind the fish trap, using its power to push the trap forward. The first thing upon reaching their destination was to install a storage box to hold the caught fish. The automatic fish trap would transfer the fish it caught into this box for temporary storage. The water at the shore was too shallow for the fan blades to operate, but placing the trap further into the river risked it being swept away by the strong currents. Stan Zuray secured the fish trap to the shore with a steel cable and placed 2 long logs between the shore and the water wheel. One end of each log was fixed to the water wheel, and the other end was anchored to the shore with rocks, stabilizing the water wheel in deeper water. However, improper handling could cause the water wheel to hit the rocky riverbank and get damaged, which would delay the process significantly. As a seasoned professional, Stan Zuray usually avoided such basic errors. They successfully positioned the water wheel in deep water and now awaited the catch. After a day, Stan Zuray returned alone to the fish trap, feeling both excited and anxious. The storage box could either be full of fish or completely empty, much like opening a mystery box. When he scooped the net, he caught several fish, but to his disappointment, they were chum salmon, typically used as dog food in Tanana, where people prefer fresh fish. Catching a king salmon once made hunter Charlie smile for a long time. During Tanana's fishing season, fishers split into 2 groups, those like Stan Zuray, who used automatic fish traps, and those like Charlie, who used nets to catch migrating fresh fish. Each year, Charlie traveled about 100 kilometers north to his childhood home in Lampert, where nearly everyone was related to him. He had moved to Tanana perhaps for love. Lampert was another excellent spot for catching fresh fish. For generations, Charlie's family had fished these waters, sustaining the village, including Charlie's elderly mother, who now relied on the younger generation for fishing. Charlie aimed to catch 200 to 300 fresh fish this year to fill his freezer and help his mother through the tough winter. He opted not to use an automatic fish trap, as maintaining such machinery was time-consuming and labor-intensive. In contrast, fishing nets were much easier to manage and could be cleaned in a day. Charlie's brother Ike also joined in. They had fished together since childhood. For such labor-intensive tasks, the community came together to help. They loaded all their equipment onto the boat and set off. Near a hillside was Charlie's family fishing spot where they planned to set 7 nets, totaling over 200 meters. These nets were placed in the river's whirlpools, formed by bends or obstacles in the water, where some fish temporarily paused, ideal spots for the nets to catch them. One end of each net was anchored to the riverbank, and the other was weighed down at the riverbed. Without these whirlpools, it would be impossible to set the nets as the swift current would push them to the shore. Although the river was not privately owned, the locations of these whirlpools had been passed down through generations, and outsiders were not allowed to set nets there. Decades of fishing experience made setting these nets a routine task for them, and the 7 nets were quickly in place. The next day, it was time for Charlie and Ike to check their fishing nets. Harvesting is one of the most enjoyable parts of fishing, but using nets comes with many uncertainties. In a moment, it could be heaven or hell, which is precisely the thrill that hunters enjoy. On their way, they encountered a cougar crossing the river. An old superstition among the elders suggests that seeing a cougar cross a river is a bad luck omen, which made Charlie and Ike anxious. This was the first net they needed to check. They started by pulling up the anchor from the whirlpool and then slowly raised the net. Soaked nets are very heavy, and lifting them from the water is no easy task. In a sense, the fishermen are the hope of the whole village. Despite the difficulty and exhaustion, they persist. When they pulled up a fresh fish, both men were thrilled, thinking it was a good start. They hoped the subsequent nets would yield even better results. Indeed, the next net felt heavy, but when they pulled it up, it was only a large, hard rock. The remaining nets were empty, not even a rock in sight. This was a significant setback for Charlie's family, spending so much time only to catch one fish. However, setbacks like this are common in the wilderness, and hunters must overcome them and redouble their efforts. While automatic fish traps are convenient, their success still depends on fate. This fishing season, the Moore family faced the most setbacks. Their fish trap from last year had broken, and although they tried to gather wood from the river to rebuild it, they couldn't find suitable materials and ended up buying some from James. After 5 days of construction, the frame was finally ready. The last task was to make the fish baskets, which required a rare type of tree, the North American larch. This tree can be bent to the desired curvature without steam heating, provided the right amount of force is applied. However, Thomas Moore had not yet mastered this technique, and he broke a valuable larch by applying too much force, earning a scolding from his father. They now had to find more larch in the forest, or they would miss the first fish run. This search took up a lot of their time, but fortunately, they found a few suitable trees. By this time, most fishermen had their automatic fish traps set in the water. The Moores had to work non-stop to catch up. With the lessons learned, Thomas was much more careful this time. They completed 2 fish baskets and called in some helpers to assemble them with the previously built frame. Moore's daughter Courtney, who was learning carpentry from him, also came to help. She acted as the peacemaker in the family, preventing conflicts between her father and brother. Finally, the water wheel was completed and ready to be set in the river. The family's sustenance, along with food for their dozens of dogs, depended on this fish trap. Their fishing spot was 15 kilometers north, a carefully chosen area by the Moores that usually yielded plenty of king salmon. Setting such a large fish trap was challenging, and they faced a storm that made the installation even more difficult. However, they managed to set the trap without incident. A day later, the Moore family returned to the fish trap. Their survival through the winter depended on it, but luck was not on their side. The trap contained only a small whitefish, a significant blow to the Moores. The mood was somber, and pessimism spread among them. The situation worsened when a local policy change drastically affected their lives. In an effort to protect river fish, the originally 4-week fishing season was canceled with future opening times undecided. This policy made survival even more difficult for the residents of Tanana as autumn approached, followed by the harsh winter. They were left wondering how they would survive and feed their families. With food already scarce in winter, their wilderness life was nearing a potentially bleak end. 2 weeks later, the local fishing ban was finally lifted, but this time they were only given 18 hours. Although drastically reduced, this was still better than nothing. People began bustling about, preparing for the hard-won fishing season. The Moore family was also busy preparing. They have kept dogs for generations and rely on free dog food from the river to survive. The automatic fish trap had been in the river for 2 weeks and malfunctioned due to floating deadwood. Moore asked his son Thomas and daughter Courtney to check and repair the fish trap. Meanwhile, Joey returned to the camp. To increase their catch and become independent from his father, he and Izzy set out to place nets in his own area, providing a double safeguard for the brief fishing season. However, someone had already placed nets in his usual spot, which angered Joey. He decided to set his net in front of the existing one. Although it felt slightly underhanded, using someone else's spot without permission seemed even less ethical. A few hours later, Stan Zure went out to check the first catch of this fishing season. Finally, there was a harvest. Fresh fish began to be loaded just as he was pulling them in, and more fish continued to be caught in the trap. Although it was far from enough, it was a good start with less than 10 hours remaining in the fishing season. It was uncertain if Stan Zure could meet his minimum goal. Using the automatic fish trap, Stan Zure caught the first batch of fish, which in the Yukon River can grow up to 60 kilograms and survive up to 60 days without food. Their meat is considered a delicacy among salmon. On his way home with the catch, Stan Zure was intercepted by his friend Linda because she had taken over the whirlpool area belonging to Stan Zure's family. Upset, Joey had placed his net in front of hers. Linda approached Stan Zure to discuss this matter. Neighbors often have disputes, but they usually get along well, so Stan did not want to complicate things. He agreed to move the net. When Stan Zure and Joey met at the camp that evening, it was raining, and the temperature was below 9 degrees Celsius. Stan Zure did not directly mention Linda's concerns, but explained to Joey that setting the nets that way could lead to both catching nothing and possibly tangling. He suggested Joey move his net downstream for a win-win situation. Reluctantly, Joey agreed, and with Izzy, braved the rain to reset the net. As the 18-hour fishing season had passed its halfway point, Stan Zure's prediction proved correct. Despite Joey placing his net in front of another, he had not caught any fish. Setting nets on a rainy night was dangerous due to the slippery slopes and low visibility, risking injury. Despite the hazards, they managed to complete the task. The next day marked the end of the fishing season. It was Joey's first and last time pulling the nets for the season. The nets were full of fish, but he was not pleased as they were all local salmon, not meeting his goal of catching at least 10 fresh fish. Stan Zure's feelings differed since he needed to feed his many sled dogs, and these salmon were perfect for that. As fresh fish continued to arrive, they ended up catching 15 fresh fish by the last check. However, they had not yet checked the automatic fish trap. Father and son unloaded their catch at the camp and quickly moved to check the fish trap. They were anxious, knowing this was their last chance to catch fresh fish. As Joey cast the net, their worries disappeared. The water tank was filled with fresh fish. By the end of the fishing season, they had caught a boatload of fish, delighting them both. That night, as they prepared to celebrate at the camp, the fish-stealing grizzly bear invaded again. Before Stan Zure could react, Joey ran out and shot the bear with 1 bullet. The young hunter showed bravery and no fear of danger. In such difficult times, not only did they catch enough fish, but a bear also delivered itself to their doorstep, earning Stan Zure and his son at least $2,000 and a large quantity of bear meat. After Charlie failed with net fishing, during a brief pause in net fishing, Charlie asked his son Bob to clear the winter hunting trails. Fur was their main source of income, and if the trails weren't maintained for over 2 years, others could take them over, effectively cutting off their income. After arranging things at home, Charlie returned to the river to check the nets, his first check since setting them. Supporting both elderly relatives and young children, along with many villagers, his pressure was something many could empathize with. The biggest fear with net fishing is drifting logs, which can easily tear the nets. Sometimes, what you fear most happens. The first net had a huge hole torn by a log, rendering it useless. Charlie was devastated. The net was worth $500, and he potentially lost dozens of fish. Although these nets are usually robust, Only a very large log could cause such damage. However, he had no time to dwell on this as 6 more nets awaited his inspection. After 6 hours into the fishing season, they had caught only 1 salmon and lost a valuable net. This made Charlie feel desperate, with heartache and immense pressure likely leading to a sleepless night. The next day marked the end of the 18-hour fishing season, the last chance to catch fresh fish for the year. Fortune tends to favor the hard-working, and after many setbacks, Charlie's nets finally began to yield fish, mostly the fresh fish he desired, coming one after another, far exceeding expectations. Thinking of his family not having to starve in winter filled Charlie with joy. Not just him, but everyone on the boat shared in the joy of this bountiful harvest. Lampert, located upstream from Tanana, receives migrating fresh fish first each year, and with their family's whirlpool being large and deep, Charlie usually catches enough fish earlier than others. Despite many setbacks this year, the outcome was perfect. However, not everyone was as lucky as Charlie. The Moore family, who had painstakingly set up their automatic fish trap, returned disappointed every time they checked their catch during the 18-hour season. They caught only a few dozen fish, mostly salmon, marking it as one of the worst harvests in decades. Apart from the Moore family, James also set up nets, but his situation was even worse. He caught only a handful of fish, predominantly salmon, which were insufficient even as a snack for his many children and dogs. Wondering how to survive the winter, he felt utterly lost. While he was worrying, Joey, having heard that James had a poor fishing haul this year, brought him some bear meat. This meat could feed James's family for a few days. Joey's gesture was truly timely help. In fact, locals often share some of their game with others, believing that this generosity will lead to more success in future hunts. More importantly, Joey focused on helping those in need, fostering unity within the Tanana community.